SEP Fanfic Readings presents Finding Hermione by ebookdragon. Chapter 29. Becoming Minerva Malfoy. Afternoon of January 6th. "Will you let me adopt Minerva?" Draco asked Hermione. "Will you allow me to be a father to both your daughters and raise them with you?" Draco wanted to tack on a "will you marry me?" and maybe a "will you have my babies?" to his list of proposals, but he thought that it wasn't the right time to make a marriage proposal while she was currently married to another man. He also wasn't going to ask her to be the mother of his hopeful babies in front of his mother. Granted, his mother was no prude. She knew they lived together, obviously. She even knew they had sex, but they were just things he wasn't willing to talk about with her sitting there watching the two of them. "Yes, Draco," Hermione said, to his relief. Draco bowed his head and touched his forehead to their clasped hands. "Thank you, Hermione," Draco said fervently. A watery chuckle burst from Hermione's mouth. She touched his cheek and forced his face up to meet her gaze. She looked down at him with an amused smile. "Honestly, Draco, who did you think I was going to let adopt Minerva?" Draco gave her a sheepish grin. "Well, I hoped it would be me, but I didn't want to assume. Also, I thought it would be better if I did the asking so that you know that I want them as much my own." "I know that you do," Hermione said. "Come, sit down. Your knee has to be going numb by now." Draco rose stiffly from the floor. His knee did hurt, and he rubbed it to get the blood circulating again. Draco sat down on the sofa beside Hermione. He looked over at his mother, who smiled enigmatically at him. Draco didn't bother to puzzle over his mother's smile. She would tell him when she wanted. "What do we do now?" Draco asked. "Well," Hermione said, with a bit of apprehension, "I need to go talk to Minerva. Then I'll go see if I can catch me a Weasley, as well as bring Rose home." "If you aren't able to bring one back, I'll go over there and drag the first one I see back by their hair if need be," Draco said ominously. Draco might have made an effort to end the Malfoy-Weasley feud, but he would resume hostilities if they kept him from adopting Minerva. "Caveman," Hermione muttered, then in a chiding tone, "They have to be willing, Draco." "Fine," Draco said sullenly. "Bribe them if you have to. Give them whatever they ask for." "Sometimes, Draco," his mother said dryly, "you are so like your father. This is not something we can use force or bribery for. It takes diplomacy." "Mother," Draco retorted, "you know as well as I do that our families have been feuding for centuries. I don't think they're going to be eager to hand one of their family members over to me." "I think you're not giving the Weasleys enough credit, darling," his mother drawled. "Probably not," Draco admitted, "but I don't want to drag this out. I want Minerva to be well again, to be a happy 11-year-old girl." Hermione placed a hand on his arm. "It's what they want as well. They'll let you adopt her. I only need one to agree anyway. If I get one, then we can do the ritual." Hermione returned to his mother. "Will you help Minerva get ready after I finish talking to her?" "Of course," his mother agreed. "What can I do?" Draco asked, looking between the two of them as they both got up to leave the room. His mother arched an eyebrow at him. "You can clean up all the glass in the fireplace from your dramatics." Draco didn't bother to apologize for throwing the glass. He'd been angry at them for keeping secrets from him. Speaking of secrets, he asked them both before they left the room. "Do you two have any more secrets you're keeping from me?" Hermione looked over his shoulder at him. "Yes," she answered mysteriously. Draco goggled at them. His mother smirked at him. "Do I get to know what they are?" Draco asked impatiently. "I'm sure you'll find out some eventually," Hermione said breezily, then walked out the door into the foyer, his mother following behind. Draco set about cleaning the glass up out of the fireplace. Once the evidence of his dramatics was cleaned away, Draco plopped back down on the sofa. He sat staring into the fire, twirling his signet ring around his finger. He felt like an expectant father all over again, waiting for a bundle of joy to be thrust into his arms. He found it odd that his 3 children became his so differently. Scorpius came with so much mixed emotions, joy and sorrow, birth and death. The beginning of Scorpius's life brought with it the end of his mother's. The birth of his son also brought about great change in Draco, seeking forgiveness for his past deeds and forgiving the cruelty of others who judged him for his impossible choices. Scorpius saved him. He brought light into Draco's life and drove away the dark. He became Rose's father through words and deeds. Bedtime stories about unicorns and princesses in disguise, fast broom rides and Quidditch lessons. Rose was his princess. Rose imperiously claimed him as hers and stubbornly refused to listen to anyone who said otherwise. Minerva would become his through magic. Blood magic, though often considered to be dark, would bring another light into his life. She would become a Malfoy through blood magic. The first Malfoy daughter in centuries, Draco was sure. Probably the first ever adopted Malfoy. The door opened, and Minerva came into the room with his mother guiding her. The hollow look was slowly ebbing from her eyes and being replaced with a wary hope. His mother had cleaned her up, removing the remaining tufts of auburn hair and scrubbing out the blood that remained stubbornly behind after he and Hermione had healed her cuts. She was an odd contradiction, with her shaved head and a pretty emerald green dress and black Mary Janes. She approached him timidly, and Draco patted the seat beside him on the sofa. She sat down beside him and looked up at him. He could see the hope shining out of her eyes. "Mum says you found a way to make me not a Weasley anymore," Minerva said quietly, looking down at her hands. "Your mum and Nana Sissa have found a way," Draco answered. "Your mum is going to get someone to help us." "Mum said that I have to do a blood ritual. Why can't I just say that I'm not a Weasley anymore?" she asked. "You said you didn't want the Weasley hair and eyes anymore. Dropping the Weasley name will not make those things go away. It is in your blood. The blood ritual will allow you to forsake your father's blood," he explained. "We can just drop the Weasley name if that's what you want. If you can be all right with the Weasley hair and eyes, is that what you want?" Minerva shook her head emphatically. "So I'll just be a Granger then?" Minerva asked. Draco sighed heavily. He wasn't looking forward to having a modified version of the sex talk with his daughter. Draco started explaining a little uncomfortably. "Witches and wizards are made up of both their mother's and father's magic. That mingling of magic makes up who we are at our core, and we cannot exist without both. To forsake your father's blood, another must take his place." "You?" she asked. Draco nodded. "If you'll have me, you'll be a Malfoy. You'll look like Scorpius and me." She lunged at him then, burying her head in his side. "Thank you," she mumbled over and over again like a litany. Draco hugged her to him and dropped a kiss onto her bald head. "I knew I was doing the right thing," a voice Draco didn't recognize called from the door. "Uncle George!" Minerva called. George Weasley, with his long, shaggy, carrot-colored hair, strode into the room looking solemn, followed by his siblings. Draco was familiar with Bill, mostly because Bill had been one of the first apologies Draco had gone to make when he'd sought to make amends. He knew Charlie by the scars and tattoos. Ginny walked in behind her older brothers with Harry beside her. No Percy, but Draco hadn't expected Percy Weasley ever to darken his doorway. Draco and Ron Weasley might be personal enemies, both fighting for the affections of Hermione, but Draco and Percy were political rivals. If Draco wanted something, Percy opposed it. Whether for spite or because he didn't believe in whatever bill Draco was proposing, Draco never knew. Hermione closed the door behind her. "Hey, Peanut," George said, crouching down in front of Minerva. "Why are you calling me a peanut?" she asked, looking affronted by George's nickname. He palmed her head and jiggled it a little. "You look like a peanut with your new hairstyle. Maybe it would look good on me. What do you think?" he asked, flicking his shaggy hair off his shoulders. "Nah, you probably have a lumpy head," she answered with a grin. George started feeling for lumps on his head comically. "You all came to help me?" Minerva asked. "Yes, I volunteered first, so I get the honors. But we all agreed to help you," George said simply, taking both her hands in his. "Before we get started, I want to tell you something. Family is more than people who share your blood. Family is people who are all there for you to celebrate the good times and pick you up and carry you during the bad times. If I understand what Hermione is telling me, after this ritual, we won't be blood-related anymore. But that doesn't mean we aren't family. We'll always be family. You'll always be a part of us. We do this for you because we love you and we want what's best for you." Minerva launched herself off the sofa and hugged her uncle, nearly knocking him down. So fierce was her relief that she'd come to help. George managed to stand and wrapped his arms around Minerva's shoulders. Draco stood and held out his hand to the man, grateful that they had understood Minerva's need enough to give her up. George grasped his hand hard, giving him an appraising look. Something in Draco's face must have reassured the man, because he nodded and let go. Bill and Charlie both clapped Draco on the back. The percussive force of their slaps jolted him forward, causing both men to chuckle. Draco righted himself and winced dramatically, reminding them that their brother had almost killed him. He smirked devilishly at them over Hermione's head when she came forward to fuss over him, and scolded Bill and Charlie for hurting him. "We appreciate what your family is doing for Minerva. We understand how hard it is to ask this of you," Draco said to the Weasley siblings. "What he did to you, Hermione, and the girls was despicable," George spat, refusing to utter his brother's name. "There must be consequences for what he's done. If giving her a new father and a last name helps her heal, then, while it saddens us to let her go, we will because it's what's best for her," George said, looking down in sympathy at Minerva and squeezing her into his side. "She and her sister will be treasured as daughters of the House of Malfoy," Draco said formally. "I'll make sure they never want for anything." George nodded. "You're just getting Minerva as a Malfoy today, but we decided that when Rose gets older, if she decides she wants to be a Malfoy as well, we'll agree to it. We agreed with Hermione to let you be their father. Do a better job than he did," he said to Draco, then turned to look down at Minerva. "Well, Peanut, are you ready for this?" Minerva nodded. "Thank you, Uncle George." "So," Harry asked awkwardly, "how are we doing this?" "Let's all move over here to the open space," Hermione said, directing them to the open area between the chairs and his and Hermione's desk. They formed a loose circle with Minerva and his mother in the middle. George and Draco stood in front of Minerva with Harry and Ginny beside her. Bill and Charlie stood opposite Hermione. Hermione handed Draco and George each a slip of paper. "Okay," Hermione started. "First, I need to do a spell that will reveal the bonds tying Minerva to her father. It's a pretty big spell, and it will cover everyone in the room, but it's also difficult to maintain, and I won't be able to hold it for long. So I'm going to ask that you keep any questions about what you see to yourselves until we're done. Is everyone comfortable parts of being part of the spell?" They all nodded their agreement. "I'll give you a minute to look at the bonds, then we'll move forward. Narcissa will help you three throughout the spell while I focus on the bonds." His mother stepped up and started to explain what she would be doing. They went through a practice run before they started the proceedings. Draco searched Minerva's face one last time before Hermione cast the spell. "Are you sure this is what you want? There is no going back after this." "I'm sure," she answered firmly. "Okay, everyone ready?" Hermione said. She waved her hand over her head and said, "Something in Latin. Hold on. Animabis nostris, qui tenetar ad invictum per caritatem famelicae." A large silvery dome shot out of her wand, encompassing the occupants in the circle. Once the silvery wall of the dome hit the floor, a vast spiderweb of color appeared between them. Colors shot from each person and connected to the others in the group, or shot off at the end of the dome. Draco looked at the threads shooting out from his chest. A blue thread ran to the outside of the dome. Another ran between him and his mother. A thick gold thread connected him to Hermione at their hearts, as well as 2 sets of blue threads that connected from her abdomen to him. Along with the blue and gold that connected Hermione to Draco, there were 2 more blue threads branching out of Hermione, one to Minerva and another to the edge of the dome. Minerva had multiple blue threads heading to the edge of her dome, as well as a myriad of blue connecting her to all the Weasleys in the room. Draco looked across to Ginny and Harry. They had a gold thread connecting the 2 of them, along with 3 blue threads coming from both of them. 2 that stopped at the dome, and 1 that joined them together at Ginny's abdomen. Draco connected the dots of what that meant. He hadn't dared to hope what the little blue threads connecting him to Hermione indicated earlier, but seeing the same connection between Harry and Ginny allowed him to rejoice at the news. "Hermione," he said in wonder. He got a faint smile from her and noticed the fine sheen of sweat breaking out on her brow. He turned to his mother. "Mother, let's get this started." His mother walked up to stand beside Minerva. She took a black dagger out of her pocket and took Minerva's hand in her own. "I'm sorry, dear, but this will hurt." She sliced the dagger quickly across Minerva's hand, leaving a shallow cut of blood pooling in the palm of her hand. Minerva bit her lip to keep from crying at the sight of the blood in her palm. His mother quickly wiped the blade of the knife on the emerald green dress, leaving streaks of red. She then took George's proffered hand to hers and cut his palm as well. She placed Minerva and George's palms together and nodded at Minerva to proceed. In a strong, sure voice, Minerva intoned, I, Minerva Helen Granger Weasley, reject as my blood the most noble house of Weasley. I ask that the blood of Weasley willingly relinquish me as their blood kin. George placed the tip of his wand over their joined hands. White strands wrapped around their joined hands and traveled down their arms to wrap around the blue threads radiating from them. Minerva Helen Granger Weasley, blood of my blood, I, George Septimus Weasley, speaking for the most noble house of Weasley, do hereby relinquish you from your bond as our kin. We willingly break this bond and give you into the keeping of another. The Weasley siblings gasped as the blue threads connecting them to Minerva faded. Minerva now only had 2 blue threads that joined her, one to her mother and the other to her sister. His mother took Draco's hand and swiped a quick cut across his palm. She took Minerva's hand and placed their palms together. Minerva looked up at him. Those innocent, hopeful eyes drew him in. I, Minerva Helen Granger, ask the most noble house of Malfoy to accept me as their blood kin. Draco placed his wand over their joined hands and looked into Minerva's eyes. White strands encompassed their hands again to swirl around the threads at their hearts. Minerva Helen Granger, I, Draco Lucius Malfoy, speaking as the head of the most noble house of Malfoy, do hereby form this bond with you, and accept you as my kin, as blood of my blood, as my own blooded daughter. From this day forth, you shall have the protection of the Malfoy line and name, and shall bear the name Minerva Helen Granger Malfoy. Blue threads appeared between the 2 of them, as well as one connecting her to his mother, and another running outside the dome. Minerva was now a Malfoy, and his daughter. He marveled at the threads before they wavered and disappeared along with the silvery dome around them. Draco looked over at Hermione, his hands still clasped around Minerva's. He could feel himself bursting with joy. He saw Hermione stumble and struggle to right herself. Harry was beside her in an instant and had an arm snaked around her waist. Draco rushed over and scooped her up into his arms. He carried her over to the sofa, brushing off her protests. I'm fine, she protested weakly. Put me down. You'll hurt yourself. Draco gingerly settled her down on the sofa, as if she were made of glass. He knelt down on the floor in front of the sofa and brushed her hair off her forehead. He took a handkerchief out of his pocket and dabbed the sweat away. You're pregnant, he said quietly to her. She looked unsure and apprehensive. That's what it looks like. I know we didn't talk about this, and we didn't exactly plan for it. Are you mad? He interrupted her with a kiss, soft and sweet, full of the joy he was feeling. If I get any happier, I might burst. Did you know before we did this? Hermione shook her head. The pregnancy was a surprise to both of them, though it shouldn't have been. They hadn't exactly been diligent about casting contraceptive charms. He hadn't reminded her or cast the charm himself, which was not something he would have forgotten in the past. With Hermione, though, he hadn't cared about casting the charm. It's so soon, she worried. I know, he admitted, but that doesn't make it any less of a happy occasion. We haven't done things the normal way in this relationship yet. Why start now? People will say such horrid things, she continued to fret, rubbing a hand protectively over her abdomen. And then they'll remember what it's like to cross a Malfoy, Draco said darkly. Anyone that disparaged the mother of his children would find themselves face to face with the full force of the Malfoy wrath. You can't go around hexing people, Hermione chided. I'm not a Gryffindor, remember? Hexing people is so, he said, waving his hand, looking for the right word. Straightforward. Mild discomfort, and then the person goes back to their lives, probably not even sorry that they hurt someone's feelings. That's so unrewarding. You're going to be dreadfully overbearing the next 9 months, aren't you? She asked with a playful smile. I've always been overbearing, he answered her. He dropped the grin, though, and let her see the vulnerability he was hiding from the rest of the room. I need you to let me, he begged. I'm probably going to be overbearing and overprotective. You'll be lucky if your feet touch the ground or you get to lift anything heavier than a paperback book. I know it will be annoying for you, but I need you to be patient with me. She looked like she wanted to protest, but Draco forestalled her. Astoria. You... Draco stuttered. It hurt losing her, and I mourned everything she would miss. It would destroy me if I lost you." "Oh, Draco," she sighed. She propped herself up on an elbow and ran her hand across his furrowed brow, soothing away the worry lines. "Everything will be fine. I've done this twice before. Sturdy, muggle-born birthing hips and all that," she joked, patting the flare of her hips. "Now stop fretting. We've got a bunch of people over there trying to discreetly not get caught listening to what we're talking about." Draco looked over at the group of people still milling about in the center of the room. His mother had scourgified the blood off her emerald sheath dress and healed Minerva and George's cuts. She couldn't hide the smile on her face. Harry had the grace to blush and look away at getting caught eavesdropping. Ginny had no such compunctions and smirked at him. George grinned unrepentantly, tapped his cursed ear, and said, "Sorry, couldn't hear that. I'm sure it was irresistibly nauseating. If you start worshipping Hermione because she's pregnant, the rest of us lackwits are going to get an earful from our wives." Bill groaned at that. Charlie chuckled. "I'm glad I only have to deal with dragons." "How long can he make the ear jokes?" Draco asked quietly. "Days," Hermione laughed. Hermione sat up on the sofa, and Draco protested that she should keep laying down. He got her to compromise by keeping her feet up on the couch. He fluffed a pillow up behind her so that she could recline back on it, and sat down beside her with her feet in his lap. "Come on over and sit down, guys, since I'm obviously not going anywhere," Hermione called. "And so it begins," George intoned ominously. Bill and Charlie said goodbye, hugging Minerva and congratulating Hermione and Draco before they left. "Mind if we widen the chairs, Draco?" Harry asked politely. No, go ahead," Draco said distractedly, looking for Minerva and beckoning her over. He took her in his hands and checked to make sure that her cut was fully healed. Minerva and Hermione let him fuss unnecessarily over them. He wrapped a handkerchief around his cut. He would leave it to heal on its own. Maybe his mother had cut deep enough and it would scar. He always wanted to be able to see the reminder of how Minerva became his. "How are you feeling, Angel?" he asked. "Fine," she answered, shuffling from one foot to the other and biting her lip in a way that was so similar to her mother. Without the red hair, he could finally see how much she resembled her mother. The color of her blue eyes was starting to fade a little. "Hermione, look at her eyes," Draco said excitedly. "Come here, love," Hermione said. Minerva sat beside Hermione on the sofa and let Hermione take her face in both her hands and turn her head this way and that to catch her eyes in the different light as she closely examined her daughter. "It's working. Her eyes will probably be gray in the morning." "Does this mean her hair will change too?" Draco asked from the love seat they'd created beside Draco. Hermione nodded. "It should be blonde like Draco's when it grows back." "Speaking of growing back," his mother said from her seat on the love seat closest to Hermione, "we can't send her back to school looking like this. I had one of the elves get me some hair replenishing potion while you were at the burrow. With your permission, I'd like to take her and Rose over to the manor. I'll put the potion on her since you can't now in your condition, and maybe we'll have a bit of fun playing in the vaults." His mother was going to spoil those girls. She'd always wanted daughters and granddaughters to do girly things with. Rose would come home with a priceless tiara attached to her head. He just knew it. Maybe Minerva could use the distraction of playing in a jewelry vault to help ease the trauma of the last couple weeks. "Please, Mom?" Minerva begged excitedly. "That's fine. Make sure you tell Narcissa if you feel funny at all," Hermione said, smiling at her daughter. "She's not in any danger, right?" Draco asked worriedly, not ready to let Minerva out of his sight yet. Hermione shot him a glare, the look saying, "As if I would do a dangerous spell on my daughter." "No, she'll be fine. Being at the manor around the Malfoy family magic for a few hours would probably help solidify the bond." "Mum, are you pregnant?" Minerva asked, looking between Draco and Hermione. "Yes, love. Twins, apparently," Hermione answered. "How do you feel about that?" she asked, taking her daughter's hand in her own and looking a little unsure. Draco couldn't blame her. He was a bit hesitant how Minerva would react to this news with everything that had been going on. "Are they going to cry a lot?" Minerva asked. "That's what babies do," Hermione answered. Minerva wrinkled her nose up. "Do I have to change the diapers?" "You are expected to help when you're home from school," Hermione said calmly. "What about Rose and Scorpius?" Minerva persisted. Draco could hear Harry and Ginny chuckling at the exchange. "They have to help too," Hermione answered. She shrugged then, maybe in relief that she wouldn't be the only one on babysitting duty. "I think I'm okay with it," Then she turned to Draco. "What am I supposed to call you now?" she asked. "Whatever you're comfortable with, Angel. I know it's soon, but will you tell us how you feel?" Minerva looked at him thoughtfully for a moment. "I feel a little better now that I'm not his daughter anymore. I know you all wanted me to stay a Weasley, but I just couldn't be his daughter anymore." "We understand," Ginny said. "Does this change how you feel about your sister or us?" "Why would it change that?" Minerva asked. "We all look like Weasleys," Ginny said, gesturing to herself and George. "Rose is still his daughter." "Rose is my sister," Minerva said stubbornly, challenging Ginny to contradict her. "Ginny," Hermione said sharply, sensing Minerva starting to get upset, glaring over at her friend to shut up. "Peanut, come give us a hug before you run off to adorn yourself in Malfoy glitter," George said, from his seat beside Draco's mother, cutting through the tension in the room. Minerva ran over and hugged her uncle. Draco caught the whispered, "Remember what I told you," from George. She nodded her head, then went to hug Ginny and Harry. His mother took her hand and led her out of the room. Once the door closed behind them, George addressed Hermione. "Hermione, that was some spell you did. I bet with a bigger group, all those bonds would be quite complex." "Yes," she answered. "It can also be quite revealing, since I certainly had no idea I was pregnant." "What were the gold threads?" Harry asked. "Soulmates, I think," Hermione answered. Ginny looked excited by the answer. "So you and Draco are—" She trailed away. "That's why I have this bracelet. One of Draco's ancestors was oddly romantic," Hermione said, lifting up her arm to show them the cuff. "It also means that you and Harry are soulmates, though that's no surprise." "Angelina's not my soulmate, then," George said in a quiet, morose tone. Draco hadn't really paid attention to the bonds of the Weasley brothers. He realized then how dangerous revealing your bonds could be. It could reveal things about yourself and those around you that were better kept private. "That doesn't mean you don't love her, George," Hermione said, craning her neck around to look at him. "I believe there are so many types of soulmates, not just the romantic ones like Draco and I, or Harry and Ginny have." "Fred," George said, looking down at his hands. "I'm sorry, George," Hermione said sympathetically. "What about the blue, then?" Harry asked as Ginny surreptitiously swiped away a tear. "Blue looked like a line between family members," Draco said. Harry looked over at Draco and leveled a stern look at him. "She's your daughter now. You better take good care of her." Draco met Harry's gaze. "She was my daughter before all of this. They're both my daughters. A spell didn't change that for me." Hermione took his hand and kissed it. "She's Minerva Granger Malfoy now."